third-party House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to the Minister. Just wondering if the Minister can, the reference has been made a few times now with respect to the BC First Nations water table. Excellent name, by the way. Anyway, how was the water table established, and how were the members of that water table picked, or how was it populated, I would say?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to my friend. Welcome to this part of the conversation. I kind of like the First Nations BC water table, but anyways, we inherited the structure that we have. The BC First Nations water table. So the creation of this actually originated out of a motion from the FNLC, the First Nations Leadership Council, to direct the FNFC, Fisheries Council, to develop a terms of reference and approach to this. So that was back in September of 21. Initial meetings happened in June of 22. I have the membership list, if it would be of interest to my friend who actually sits on the table. I've mentioned Chief Whitson earlier, who's the co-chair. Hugh Breaker, who my friend would know very well. Pete Erickson from the Cosley. Cheryl Casimir, very high standing. All of these folks, I'm just looking through the list. Rod Peters, Iris Sawalis, Reynold Starr, Robin Lubman, Dina Machin, Julian Yates. And then there was First Nations Fisheries Council support, Jordan Point, who I think is, I see him around today, and Jacqueline Fitchell. We're on that, that's on the First Nations side. So just couldn't have asked for a better group of folks in terms of developing that approach and the terms of reference, which we established back in June of 2022 to see if the approach that we got to yesterday in the announcement was correct, and that's been the partnership since then.
Member.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just of interest, how is it that the water table and the participation of First Nations, all people who are very busy doing a lot of other things, how is their participation supported in order to be able to implement what the priority of this government's $100 million fund, it's all of our priority, of course, but we've created this fund now. How are the folks that are participating in this being, ensuring that they're able to pay attention to the work that's needed and being compensated for their efforts?
Minister.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. It's an important one. As government, well, everybody, government, industry, nonprofits, there's a lot of engagement going on right now. In the past, and probably in too many times currently, it's overlooked as a component of just knocking on the door and asking for counsel. So we made a budget, the FNFC requested a budget from us, just in terms of covering honorariums, travel costs. We made that those monies available to FNFC. In terms of how that money was dispersed within the First Nations side of the BC First Nations water table, that was their business. I would also point out, although it was not my friend's question, that anticipating the future use of the fund, the larger fund and what grows from it, eligibility of things like capacity building within nations is anticipated. So it's not simply the work of working in the watershed streams, the biology. One also imagines the participation, and we saw this through the some different work, but I think it's instructive. The Healthy Watershed Initiative, one of the things that stood out for me in talking to the leadership within that group, Chief Whitson was part of that, was the inclusion of protocol and ceremony in budget lines in all of the projects that were initiated. Maybe that's a common practice, but I had not seen that before. And it stood out to me that in her reflection that many of the projects that were initiated through that, some of which were from First Nations exclusively, didn't include costs for ceremonial, and they were sent back and said, no, you need to add that part in if you're doing this kind of work, which is very innovative from my perspective. I'm certainly not from many others, but just to return back to the beginning, FNSC requested a budget of us. We made that available so that they could support the membership that, as my friend said, could properly engage and pay attention to the important work that was in front of us all.
Member.
Appreciate the response. Appreciate, I think, the different approach that's been taken here. I think because of Indigenous engagement, in the involvement of it in the decision around where this fund is being created and the information that's gathered. I think what's important is that that's not just a one-time thing. That there's going to be ongoing engagement, and to think about, maybe part of the funds for this, part of the money that's in the fund can sustain the ongoing engagement and participation, so that we don't get into a situation. I've raised this in another one of these supplementary estimates where a lot of that technical work, a lot of that legal work is for the First Nations people to volunteer, and I don't think that's appropriate, and I don't sense that or believe that that's what's happening here. With respect to, and I'm going to jump around a little bit because then I'm going to hand it back. I only have a few minutes here. So my colleague from, is it Williams Lake? Caribou, Chilcotin. Williams Lake, but Caribou, Chilcotin, was asking about the funds and the growth of the funds. Has the ministry considered perhaps when there's fines levied against industry, or that there's money being collected because of because a company has kind of wronged the regulation or whatever, that money could then go in and be a part of the sustaining of this fund over the long term?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to my friend for the question. The decision of making that possible, so that somebody in a violation or through a rental arrangement, the money would go directly into the fund, is an across the government policy change that frankly is a good contemplation. So one could imagine a future state, but that's not a decision we can put into this criteria because it goes beyond our capacity as our ministry. It's a finance decision, but it's a more than interesting notion of user pay going into the contribution and the restitution of what damage was done.
Members, since their bell has rung for a big House vote, and recognizing the member once again.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and appreciate the Minister's response prior to the recess. I think that there's a wide variety of different options for the provincial government to consider going forward, and I recognize that we're not talking about the future, we're talking about this right now, and I think fines is one of them. Fees might be another source of revenue that to ensure that we're all of the activity around watersheds, all the activity around water, contributing to water, to the protection of water, and to the restoration of water. And I think that's the spirit of this this fund is to do that. I only have a couple of minutes left here, and so I just have a question. We're putting with this vote, put $100 million aside to create a fund for watershed security. And the question is around the siloing of the provincial government and the relationship that the Ministry of Waterland and Resource Stewardship has with the Ministry of Forests, the Ministry of Mines, the Ministry of the Environment, to ensure that work that's being done, because there is a promise here. The promise is, by including First Nations into this, that the work, the outcomes will be that watersheds will be secure, and that they will be improved, and that hopefully nature will return to what it once was. What is the interaction between Walrus, or Waterland and Resource Stewardship, and forests, say, or mines, to ensure that what's going on down here in the watershed is not being detracted by what's going on up there in the watershed?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank my colleague for the question. He's, of course, right in thinking about watersheds, and that's the sound advice that we've gotten through the consultation process with the BC First Nations Water Table. What I'd point, I read the list of membership, and I won't read the entire list of membership on the BC side, But he can rest assured that it not only had representation from my ministry, but it also had representation from Ministry of Forests, Ministry of Indigenous Reconciliation, the Ministry of Health, because of course drinking water is a hugely important component of this, along with other ministries that were represented in support of the BC Water Table, which continues. So that's the table, which was engaged in setting up what we're creating with with the entity that will receive the funds. The ultimate goal of the fund and the strategy is to think and plan at watershed levels, right? This is the ultimate cross-sectoral effort that is essentially the genesis of this ministry itself. So when we were creating, I know this is a little bit outside of estimates, Madam Chair, but it's pertinent to the question. In creating this ministry, we spent a great deal of time in consultation to ask First Nations, industry, local government, what's working, what's not, when dealing with the provincial government with respect to land use planning or the absence of. And how do we build an entity within government by its design to do better, to do a more holistic approach in thinking about maritime planning at scale, watershed level at scale, and the highest level, which is modernized land use planning. And hopefully within the next number of weeks and months, we'll be standing up phases of projects across the province with First Nations. And implicit in them will be the capacity to do exactly this. Within a modernized land use plan, the watershed level specific recovery, restoration, and then hopefully implicating some of those tools that my friend referred to. So when we set up the water table, it was across ministry. When we do modernized land use planning, as we're doing and initiating in Treaty 8, Blueberry River, Taltan, and others, it's cross ministry by design, and it has to be. And the siloing, I would argue, has been one of the main ways we have failed the ecological imperative that we have as a province, because one not talking to the other. And from a local perspective, someone living in the Northwest, that was always frustrating and very confusing. And the outcomes were what they were. Thank you, Chair.
Member.
Thank you. I'm actually going to just end my questions there, because I have been tracking what my colleague from Caribou-Chilcotin has been talking and asking about, and I'm confident that the questions are being asked and responded to, and there's a lot that's going to happen with this over the next few years that we will be involved with. I just want to say that I think that of the initiatives that we are investing in these supplementary estimates, that this is one of the most exciting areas for me as someone who's came in here working on salmon policy in the earliest times, 2017, 2018. I was thrilled when the BC SRIF brought $143 million. It seems like these supplemental estimates are, $143 million is nothing compared to what we've been talking about this past week. We've been talking about, over billions of dollars. And I think that the $100 million is a great start, and look forward to seeing this fund grow. More than that, I look forward to seeing that coordinated decision-making that the minister was just talking about, so that the investments that we're making in this fund to improve the watersheds, improve their function and the outcomes for them is not being diminished by other decisions that are being made in government, which is often what we see. So thank the minister for the answer. Thank the member for a few minutes here, and I'll just take my seat.